Hey everybody, this is Kevin Wallace, double CCIE and Cisco Press author, and in this video we're going to be installing a Cisco Unified Communications Manager server. Our goal at the end of this video is to have a couple of phones. I've got a couple of these Cisco 8845 IP phones. We simply want them to be able to call one another, to set up an audio call, and they've got a built-in video camera. They'll set up a video call as well. And this video is really building on a couple of prior videos. If you haven't seen those videos yet, no worries. I'll put links for them in the description of this video. But prior to this, I did a video on how to install the VMware ESXi server and how to install the Cisco CSR 1000 vRouter. This video assumes that we've already done that, or at least we know how to do that, because this Cisco Unified Communications Manager install that we'll be doing in this video, it's going to be installed on that VMware ESXi server. And to mimic what's going on with the CCSI Collaboration Lab version 2.0, we're going to put that Communications Manager server behind a virtual router, behind our Cisco CSR 1000 vRouter. And we're going to be going through that router to get out to the rest of the world in upcoming videos. To get started, let me show you the topology that we're going to be building in this video. All right, now in a prior video, and again, I'll have a link to that video in the description of this video, but in a prior video, we talked about installing the CSR 1000 vRouter. In this video, we're going to be assuming that we've got a CSR 1000 vRouter, Router HQ in place that gets our Cisco Unified Communications Manager server out to the rest of the world. We will do a quick install of that, but I won't spend a lot of time talking about exactly what we're doing. You can go check out the other video for that. And to save time, I've already uploaded the ISO file to the data store of our ESXi server, so we don't have to wait for that upload to happen again. But I'll show you how to install that router, how to get it configured. We'll also install an HQSW vSwitch, a virtual switch. Remember, we already have a virtual switch that we get by default with ESXi. It's called vSwitch 0, and we have port groups that we associate with these switches. For the vSwitch 0, we have the default port group of VM network. And I'll create another port group called HQPG for HQ port group that will assign to our HQ switch that we create. Then we're going to install the Cisco Unified Communications Manager server version 12.0, which is what is on currently the CCSI Collaboration Lab, and that version of the lab was released on July 23rd, 2018. Not sure when you're watching this video, but that's when that lab came out, and this is current for that lab. And we'll talk in just a moment about options for getting the software to do the installation. And I'm not going to bother in the video series, just for time's sake, to install a subscriber. In other words, a backup communications manager server that we could use to expand its capacity and take some of the load off the publisher. We're just going to have a single communications manager server in this video series. And it's going to have an IP address of 10.3.3.1. I'm going to reserve the .2 in that fourth octet for a subscriber if I decide to install one. But in future videos, I'll give you a sneak peek of what's coming up. I'm going to show you how to install the Cisco Unity Connection server for unified messaging. We're also going to install the I am in presence server. That's required if we have a client like Jabber, and it's going to allow us to see the availability of someone, if they're available to take a call right now or not. And as part of that installation, we need to do some name resolution. And I'm going to install a Microsoft Windows 2012 R2 server that we might use for Active Directory in an upcoming video. But when we install the I am in presence server, this Microsoft Windows server is going to be used as our DNS server. It's going to be very easy to add a DNS record, an alias record, for our instant messaging and presence server. And these virtual switches that we have, they can connect out to actual physical gear using the network interface cards, or the NICs, in my physical server. For the virtual switch HQ-SW that we install, I'm going to configure it to get out to the rest of the world via NIC 1, and it's going to be connected into a physical switch. HQ physical switch is how I've named that switch. And I'm going to have a couple of our Cisco 8845 phones plugged into that switch. And at the end of this video, the goal is to have those two phones call one another. And in a future video, to illustrate the HQ I am in presence, we're going to install a Jabber client on a machine in my lab network. And it's going to be going through the HQ router as if it were on the internet to get in and register with Communications Manager and set up a phone call with one of the HQ phones. But in this video, let's narrow our focus. In this video, This is what we want to do. We want these two phones to register with Communications Manager and call one another. Seems like a basic goal, a basic task, but there's a lot to it. The first challenge that we have to overcome is getting our hands on the Communications Manager software. And Cisco used to have an option where we could get a non-licensed eval version for free. To my knowledge, that option no longer exists for the current version of Communications Manager. So let's talk about some different ways of getting our hands on the software. And I've used all these different ways that I'm going to tell you about. First, if you're a Cisco partner or you work for a Cisco partner, I actually have my CCSI, my Cisco Instructor Certification, associated with a Cisco Learning Partner. So this is the option that I use to get the software that we're going to be installing. But if you work for a partner, you might be able to use Cisco's Not For Resale Marketplace. And I thought it was hard to find, so I created a shortcut link for you, bit.ly/Cisco-NFR. But beware, don't try this if you don't work with a partner. They warn you very clearly that even after you place your order and you pay your money, before they allow you to download the software, they verify your partner status to make sure you're legit, that you really are associated with a partner. So only try that if you are associated with a Cisco partner. If you're not, you might want to find a Cisco reseller. I've done this before. I've had to get some Unity software that did not come with a Not For Resale bundle, so I reached out to a Cisco reseller. And you can find one closest to you. You can go to bit.ly/Cisco-reseller. Or you might want to reach directly out to Cisco Sales. And they have a page where you can email or call Cisco Sales. For more information, go check out bit.ly/Cisco-sales. Hopefully those shortcut links I made for you will make it a lot easier to navigate through those different options. But those are some of the different ways that you can obtain a copy of Cisco Unified Communications Manager. Again, to my knowledge, I don't think that Cisco was allowing us to freely download eval copies these days. And the way I got the software that I'm going to be installing, I used the Not For Resale program and I purchased my software from there. But that's how you get the software, and just to save time, I've already uploaded the ISO file for Communications Manager on our ESXi server. Now let's go ahead and jump right into our ESXi interface, and we want to create a virtual switch, we want to create a port group, and once we get that set up, we want to configure a CSR 1000V router. Once we get that set up, then we'll install our Cisco Unified Communications Manager. As you can tell, this is going to be a longer video, and one you might want to revisit. Now, join me out at the ESXi interface. Well, to build out this topology, the first thing we want to do is to create that virtual switch that's going to be named HQ-SW. So let's go under Networking here in ESXi and say that we want to add a virtual switch. I'm going to name it HQ-SW, and the uplink is going to be VM NIC 1. NIC 0 is already in use. NIC 0 is assigned to the built-in switch, vSwitch 0, but this is going to connect out later to a physical switch into which we're going to connect our IP phones. Let's add that. Now, let's create a port group that we will assign to that virtual switch. We'll go under Port Groups. I'll say Add a Port Group, and we'll create one called HQ-PG for Port Group, and it's going to be associated with HQ-SW as our switch. Great. Now we're ready to install our Cisco CSR 1000V router. And to do that, I'll go under Virtual Machines. I'll say that we want to create a virtual machine, and I'm going to do this pretty rapidly because we already had a video showing you step by step exactly what I'm about to do. Again, the link for that video is in the description of this video, but I'm going to do this using an ISO file. I'll say create a new virtual machine that I'm going to name HQ, and this is going to be compatible with ESXi 5.0, and the guest operating system is Linux, and I'm going to select other 2.4.x Linux 64-bit. We'll say next. I'll store it in my one and only data store. I'll say that I want to use 2.5 gig of RAM. 8 gig of hard drive is fine. I do want to add another network adapter. So let's add a second network adapter. One is going to be using the port group HQPG. The other one, I'll assign it to the port group of VM network. Now when I boot up, I want to boot up using my ISO file. So I'll select the ISO file that I've already uploaded to my data store. It's the CSR 1000V file. Let's select that. I'll say next and finish. And let's get this booted up. And at this point, there's just a bit of waiting while we wait for this router to boot all the way up. So what I'm going to do is pause the video here, and after the installation is complete, we'll rejoin the video. Well, the CSR1000V is installed now, and let's do a basic configuration. I want to move this over to a different tab and enlarge it so we can see it better. Under Actions, I'll say Open Console in New Tab, and then I'll magnify that screen a bit, make it easier for you to see. Do we want to enter the initial configuration dialog? No, we do not. And just like we did in our CSR1000V video, we want to do some basic setup where we go into the console line and say logging synchronous, so that when we type something and a message pops up on the console, it doesn't overwrite what we were typing. We want to set the exact timeout to not to timeout. We want to turn off IP domain lookup. So let's do those things. Say enable. Let's go into line console 0 and say logging synchronous exec -timeout 0 space 0. In global config, we'll say no IP domain lookup. So if I mistype a command, it won't interpret that as a DNS name and try to resolve it. It'll just know I mistyped something. Let's set the host name. We'll say the host name is HQ. Now let's go check and see, because this gets a little bit confusing to me sometimes. I'm not quite sure which of my interfaces, if I do a show IP interface brief, I've got 2 gig interfaces, but I want to just confirm which interface is connected to which switch. I want to know what subnet each interface is in. So I'm going to go back to my VMware console, and let's minimize that so I can see what's going on. And it looks like network adapter 1, which is going to be gig 1, that's connected to my VM network. That's the default network. That's my lab network. That's the 192.168.1.0/24 network. Network adapter 2 is connected to HQPG. That's the subnet to which we're going to connect our communications manager. That's the 10.3.3.0/24 network. Now that we know that, let's go back and continue with our configuration of HQ. Let's go into global configuration mode, and I'll go into interface gigabit 1, and I'll say IP address 192.168.1.33 with a 24-bit subnet mask. Let's do a no shut to bring that up administratively. Interface gig 2, IP address 10.3.3.100 with a 24-bit subnet mask. No shutdown. I'm also going to make this router the NTP server for my communications manager server. To do that, I need to make sure that I'm getting time. First, let's just confirm that I really am getting out to the outside world. Let's do a ping to my default gateway. I'll say ping 192.168.1.1. Am I getting there? Yes. That first dot was just because we were doing an ARP lookup. But yes, I'm getting to my default gateway, but in order to get out to the rest of the world, I need some route information on this router. I need to say, to get out to the rest of the world, go to this default gateway, which means I need to add a static route. I'll do a configuration terminal, and I'll add a static default route, IP route, 0.0.0.0, 0.0.0.0, 192.168.1.1. That's the IP address of my internet router that gets me out from my studio to the internet. And whatever internet router you have is probably very different than the one I have. So how you do this on your router is going to be different than how I did it on my router probably, or maybe you're not even able to do it on your router. But in order for people on the outside to get to my network that I'm about to build, to get to the 10.3.3.0/24 network, I needed to tell my internet router to get to the 10.3.3.0/24 network, go to this router, go to 192.168.1.33. Now I want to set up time on this router so it can serve up time to my communications manager server. First, I'll set the time zone. I'll say clock time zone is Eastern Standard Time -5 when we're not observing daylight savings time. When we are observing daylight savings time, I'll say clock summertime. When we are, it's called Eastern Daylight Time, and it recurs every year. And now let's point to the NTP server. I'll say NTP server, and this is the IP address of an NTP server that I just looked up online for public NTP servers. And the one I found online was 129.6.15.28. Let's do a show NTP status. And it says clock is synchronized, And I've got a stratum level of 2 on this router, which means I learned from a router on the internet that had a stratum level of 1. Excellent. So now I can point my communications manager to this HQ router, show IP interface brief. I can point it to, for example, 10.3.3.100, and it's going to be able to get time from this router. Let me save my configuration, and I think we are done with the configuration of our HQ router. Now it's time to install our communications manager server. And we want to put it on the inside of this router. In other words, we want to put it on the 10.3.3.0/24 network. Let's go back and install a virtual machine. Let's go to virtual machines, and the only virtual machine we have right now is our HQ router. I want to create a new one. I'll make this just a bit larger where we can see it. Let's create/register a VM. I'm doing this based on an ISO file. Again, this is a file that I purchased from the Cisco NFR site because I'm affiliated with a Cisco learning partner. That's how I got my file. And I want to create a new virtual machine. We'll say next, and I'm going to call this HQ-CUCM for Cisco Unified Communications Manager -pub to remind me that this is the publisher. Now, I could come along later and install multiple subscribers if I wanted to. That would give me more capacity and redundancy and allow me to take some of the load off the publisher, but this is a very small lab network that I'm just using for demonstration purposes, so I'll probably not install a subscriber. For the compatibility, I'm going to select, and probably different values would work here, but here's one that I tested out that did work. I'm going to use ESXi version 5.5, and the guest operating system is Linux. And this one I want to be very specific about because when I picked the wrong Linux version, it told me, hey, this is the wrong Linux version. I want to use CentOS 4/5 or later 64-bit. That's what we need. I'm going to use my one and only data store to store this virtual machine. And I'm going to say that I have a couple of CPUs. I'll say that I have 8 gig of RAM. And I'll say that I have a 160 gig hard drive. But I don't want to take up 160 gig on my ESXi server, so I'm going to say just provision this as needed. That means I'm going to choose thin provisioned. So I just click on that hard disk arrow and select thin provisioned. Now, to which port group do I connect this server? I could connect it to the VM network. That would put it in the 192.168.1.0/24 network. I don't want that though. I want it to go in the 10.3.3.0/24 network. That's represented by the HQ port group, so that looks good. For my CD drive, I'm going to do this using a data store ISO file, which I already have. And it's this file, version 12.0 of Cisco Unified Communications Manager. Let's select that. We'll say next and finish. We'll give it a moment to create. And let's power it on. And I'll put this in a different tab as well. Make this a bit larger. Now this process does take a while. There's some initial input that's needed, but then we just let it sit, and literally it could take hours to let it sit. And the way you navigate back and forth between these menu options is you might be able to use your arrow or tab keys. I'm going to say, no, I don't want to test the media before I install this. So I'm going to say skip that test. And what I will do is fast forward some of the installation process while we're waiting on a new prompt, just so you don't have to wait through it as you're watching the video. This ISO file only had one product that I can select from, and it's what I want. It's Cisco Unified Communications Manager. I'm going to do a tab and an enter to say OK. Do I really want to install version 12.0.1 of Communications Manager? Yes, I do. Do I want to perform the initial configuration? Yes, I do. I'm not applying a patch, I'm just installing the software on the ISO file. This is a basic installation, and I'll select my time zone, and then tab down to say OK. I'll allow my NIC to auto-negotiate speed and duplex. I do not want to change the maximum transmission unit size. I do not want to use DHCP. I want to have a static IP address for this machine. And here it is. Well, first I give the name, which is HQ-CUCM-pub. Then I tab down to enter the IP address of 10.3.3.1. We've got a 24-bit subnet mask. And our gateway is the IP address of our CSR router that we just installed. which has an IP address of 10.3.3.100. We'll say OK. I do not want to enable DNS on this machine, so I'll say no to that. Now, for all of the security passwords and security user IDs, I'm going to be consistent just to make it easy for me in the lab. In the real world, you would probably want to have different passwords for different purposes, but I'm just going to have an administrator ID of administrator, and I'm going to use the same password for everything. So I'll say administrator. I'll enter my password and say OK. The organization, this is where you can self-document your install. I'll say the organization, it's my company, it's Kevin Wallace Training LLC. The unit is development. The location is Richmond, Kentucky in the United States. We'll say OK to that. Is this the first Communications Manager server in this cluster? Yes, it is. The NTP server is my router. I don't need this server to go out to the internet to get time. It can get it from my CSR 1000V. And I can point it to 10.3.3.100. Tab through all the other options and say OK. For the security password, I'm going to use the same password that I used for my administrator login. Again, you probably will want to use something different in the real world. Just trying to simplify it for the lab. We'll say OK to that. I do not want to set up SMTP on this server, so I'll say no. And at this point, I'm not concerned about enabling the Smart Call Home feature. So I'll say disable that by hitting a spacebar, then a tab and OK. Application username, again, I'm going to use my same set of credentials just for simplicity in this demo. Administrator. Same password. OK. The platform configuration is complete. And since I'm doing this on a VMware virtual disk, it says I've got to reinitialize the disk. No problem. I'll just tab over to where it says reinitialize. Press enter. And it's going to take quite a while to install. So what I'm going to do is pause the video and we'll resume after the installation is complete. Well, after waiting about 2 hours, I didn't time it exactly, but it was about 2 hours, the installation finally finished and I was brought to this login prompt. Now, by the way, it did ask me for one bit of input during that installation, the remainder of the installation. Since I'm installing this in my own VMware environment, it noticed that it was not supported hardware, and it said, if you want to continue, you got to agree that you're not going to try to get support on this. This is going to be unsupported if you go ahead and install it. So I had to confirm that, yes, I want to go ahead and install. But now we're all up and running here. And by the way, when you first get to the login prompt, when you're doing your installation, you're probably not going to be able to get to the GUI right away. It's probably going to take a few minutes. It takes a while for the web services to get up and running in the background. But I've waited a while so that we can go to those web services. And I'm pointing to the IP address of 10.3.3.1, and we can log in to either the user interface or the administrator interface. I'm going to go into Cisco Unified Communications Manager. And because this is using a self-signed certificate, I have to say, yes, I want to proceed anyway. And I'll get logged in using those credentials that I set up during the install. And since I've not yet applied a license to this, we're going to get some warnings about, hey, you're on an evaluation mode and you only have so many days. In fact, what you might want to do at this point, before you do any configuration, I've already got a snapshot of this on another server, so I'm not going to take time to do it now. But you might want to come back to your VMware console, right-click on your virtual machine, say Snapshots, and take a snapshot of what's installed right now. So you'll have a snapshot of a base installation. And if you ever want to go back to that, you don't have to go through the 2-hour process of reinstalling. You just restore from the snapshot. So you might want to do that. I'd recommend that you do. All right, let's take a look now at how we do a base configuration on Communications Manager. Now, I could just be really quick about this and say, I'll take all the default settings and I'll just add a couple of phones and yay, they make a phone call. But that's not a good practice in my book. I like to always go in and set up things initially that's going to help me later on. I want to go ahead and set up my device pool and my media resource groups and my media resource group lists and all those things. It's going to make it easier later when I'm adding on additional sites. I'm adding on a Cisco Unified Border element. I'm adding trunks. I've already got things in place that I can assign to those different devices. Now, of course, this is not going to be a perfect set of base parameters for every installation, but it's what I like to start with. It lends itself, I found out, well to lab studies. So let me show you what I do when I'm getting a new installation set up. The first thing I want to do is start all the services on this server except for the D8CP service. I don't want the D8CP service handing out information before I'm ready for it to hand out information. To do that, I'm going to go under Navigation, and we'll go under Cisco Unified Serviceability and say Go. And under Tools, we'll select Service Activation. Make that just a bit larger for us. And I'm going to check all services by checking that, but I'm going to go in and deselect the D8CP monitor service. I'll turn that on later when I'm ready for the D8CP service to hand out IP address information. We'll click Save and then OK. All right, the services are now activated except for the D8CP service. And by the way, that took several minutes to happen. I just sped through the video so you didn't have to watch all that. And now with these services started, let's go back to our Communication Manager Administration interface. Go to Navigation, select that and say Go. And what we want to do next is to remove DNS reliance. I want IP phones pointing to Communication Manager using its IP address rather than relying on a DNS configuration. That's going to be simpler for us. A couple places I need to go to do that. First, I'm going to go under System and Server. Let's do a find, and we should see ourselves as a server. And notice that we're known by our name, CUCM Pub. I want to change that to our IP address of 10.3.3.1. Let's save that. And I also need to make some changes under Enterprise Parameters. I'm going to go under System, Enterprise Parameters. And a few things I want to change here that I typically change. Based on the phone models that I'm using, they only speak SIP. So if I want to turn on auto registration later on, I want to use SIP as that auto registration protocol. The default is Skinny, the Skinny Client Control Protocol, SCCP. I'm going to change that to SIP. We'll say OK. Something else that's a default that I usually change is the BLF for call lists is disabled. That's busy lamp field. I normally enable that, and I'll say OK. And now let's scroll down till we see a bunch of URLs. You see these URLs, it's got the name of our publisher as part of the URL. As part of removing DNS reliance, I want to put in the IP address of the server here instead of the server's name. So it's 10.3.3.1. In fact, just to make that easier, I'm going to copy that and just paste it in all of these URLs where the name appears. We've got some non-secure and some secure URLs. We do it for both. When we're done with that, I'll do a save. And some things, after we make the change, in order to make the changes take effect, we need to do a reset. So I'll say reset, and we'll do an OK. And I'll close out of that. And there are some other parameters that I like to adjust as I'm setting up my base configuration. They're not enterprise parameters, they're service parameters. Let's go into service parameters, and let's select our one and only server that we have right now. And the service that I'm going to be setting parameters for is the Cisco Call Manager service. The first thing I want to do is search for a timer. There's a timer called the T302 timer. It's the interdigit timeout timer. And you can run into an issue sometimes when you're setting up a dial plan where you have a length of a dial string that you'll match, but you're not sure how long it's going to be. You're waiting for an interdigit timeout to occur. By default, that interdigit timeout is 15 seconds, which in my book is way too long. I like to set it to either 2 seconds or 3 seconds. I'll set it to 3. By the way, you got to be careful with the units of measure. The units of measure are in milliseconds. So I want to set this to 3,000 milliseconds. I'm going to do a find in my browser for 302. There's a couple of these timers. Notice the default is 15,000 milliseconds. I'm going to set that to 3,000 milliseconds. Let's look for the other instance of T302. And we'll set that also to 3,000 milliseconds. Now, there are a few stop routing. In fact, let me just search for that. Stop routing on different conditions. I like to set all of those to false, usually. If it says stop routing based on something, I'm going to say no, don't do that. Generally, I'll want to change the default inter-region max audio bandwidth. If I'm going between different regions, maybe different geographical sites, I want to be able to use the ILBC codec, not just the G.729 codec, so I'll bump that up to 16 kilobits per second instead of the default of 8. If I want to enable AAR, automated alternate routing, I need to turn that on. I'll set that to true. And for Cisco Unified Mobility, there's a few things I like to change down here. I like to say I want to enable enterprise feature access. We'll set that to true. Now, we're not getting into all these features in this video series, but it's what I like to do to set the foundation for then doing a more advanced lab. So it's just a habit I've gotten into. I want to enable mobile voice access. I'll set that to true. And for matching, when I'm calling in and I want to be recognized as me by this service, I don't want to do a complete match of my phone number. There's some issues that we'll not get into now that can happen if you try to do a complete match. I'm going to say a partial match is all I want, and I just need to match 7 digits. All right, let's save that. And now in preparation to register our 2 IP phones, there's a few things that I want to set up, some settings that will be inherited by those phones. First, let's go under System, and let's take a look at our Cisco Unified Communications Manager group. If I had 2 servers here, which I don't, I've just got the one. If I had 2 servers, I would go into this default Communications Manager group, and I would put the subscriber first and the publisher second. Here I've just got the one, so it doesn't really matter. I'll just leave that at the default. Next, I want to create an NTP reference, which is required by our SIP speaking phones, which are what we're using. So let's go under System, and I'll say Phone NTP reference. I already specified an NTP server during the installation, but that's for the underlying Communications Manager server. For SIP speaking phones, we have to set the Phone NTP reference. Do I have one already? Let's do a find. No, I do not, so we'll create one. We'll say we'll point to the IP address of 10.3.3.100. That's our CSR 1000V we installed earlier. And I'll say that I'm going to use unicast going directly to that IP address, and I'll save that. Let's specify our time zone by going under System, DateTime group. And I'm pretending this is in my location of Kentucky. We're in Eastern Time. So let's go into CM Local. And I'm going to create some different time groups because I want to set this up where I may have some additional sites. If I know that I'm going to be adding a site that's in Los Angeles and a site that's in Tokyo, I would want to go ahead and set up the DateTime group so I can then assign those DateTime groups to the device pools for those sites that we'll get into in just a few moments. I'm going to rename this one to HQ. This is going to represent my HQ location. The time zone is GMT-5. Let's see if I can find that for Kentucky. Here it is. We'll select that. Now, when you're looking at the date and the time on your phone, you can do it in 24-hour time, or you can do AM and PM 12-hour. I'll do that. You can change the separator to a dash or a dot. I'll just leave those at the default. Now, let's add the phone NTP reference that we created a moment ago. We just have the one. I'll select it and say Add Selected. I'll do a save. Now I need to create a couple of other DateTime groups for my other sites that I want to prepare to install later on. In fact, I'll just make a copy of this and then make some modifications. Let's make a copy, and I'll say that for the branch 1 site, or the BR1 site, we'll say that it's in Los Angeles. That's GMT-8. Let's see if I can find that. Here it is. I'll leave everything else the same. We'll do a save. Let's make another copy and create one for our second branch office, BR2. We'll say that this is in Tokyo. So let's look ahead. And here's Asia, Tokyo. We'll save that. Now if I say I want to go back and list out my DateTime groups, I have 3 of them for each of my 3 sites. Again, we're just installing one site in this video. The next thing I want to do is set up some default regions. I'm not going to do any advanced region configuration or even get into what regions do in this video. I just want to set these up as placeholders that I can then go modify and not have to create them later on. Let's go under System, Region, Information, Region. This is going to influence what codec is being used between different sites. I've got my default region, which I will rename to HQ. I'll save that. I'll add a new region, which I'll call BR1. Save that. And we'll add a third region, which we'll call BR2. We'll save that. Just to confirm, we should have 3 regions now that will influence codec selection. Similarly, I want to set up locations which can limit how much bandwidth is being used between our different locations. Let's go under System, Location Info, Location. Let's see what we have now. We've just got our default location of Hub None. Let's change its name to HQ. Let's add a new one for BR1. And let's add a new one for BR2. I'll not worry about setting any location parameters right now. That's a topic for another video. Let's take a look and confirm that we created these locations. Now, the Phantom and the Shadow, those are used for SIP trunks. That's something we don't need to get into right now. But for now, I just want to have some basic locations set up for 3 different sites. I also like to create a basic set of partitions and calling search spaces that can limit who is able to call whom. Let's go under Call Routing, Class of Control Partition. And I won't get into a big discussion about what partitions and calling search spaces are. I'll just show you what I like to do at a minimum to get started. I'm going to create an internal partition to which I'm going to assign the directory numbers on my phones inside of my sites. I'm going to create an HQ partition that can be assigned to translation patterns used by HQ IP phones. Again, that's not a topic for this video. I'll set up one for each of my other sites, BR1, BR2. I'll set up one called PSTN, which gets into some pretty advanced route pattern manipulation. That's a topic for another video. And associated with that PSTN partition, we have strip, where I'm going to be stripping off a leading plus sign, and to modify the dial number as we go out, and to modify a dial number as it comes in to our site and is displayed on the IP phone. I'm going to create a couple of partitions that I can use to modify those strings, those dial strings. HQ DNS out and HQ Annie in. We'll get into what that means in some more advanced training. Let's save those partitions. And now that we've got the partitions created, we can create some calling search spaces and populate those calling search spaces with partitions. Let's confirm that we did create our partitions. Let's do a find. That looks great. Let's now go back under Call Routing Class of Control and say Calling Search Space. And I'm going to create an internal calling search space to which I'm going to assign the internal partition. I'll select it and move it down to the selected partitions area. We'll save that. And any device to which I assign the internal calling search space will have permission to call any directory number which is assigned to the internal partition. Let's make a copy of that. And I'll typically assign a calling search space of HQ to my HQ phones, and it will contain the partitions of internal as well as HQ. Save that. Let's make a copy of it. Let's create a calling search space of BR1, and it's going to contain the partitions of internal and, you guessed it, BR1. Save that. Another copy. This one's going to be called BR2, and it's going to contain partitions of internal and BR2. Save that. Let's make a copy and create a PSTN calling search space, which is only going to contain the partition of PSTN. Again, please don't be overly concerned that I'm not explaining fully what all these partitions and calling search spaces are used for. Those are lengthy discussions in themselves. This is just a nice base configuration to save myself time later on. Let's do a save. Just a couple of calling start spaces to go. Let's make a copy. And we'll do one for HQ DNS out, which contains the partition of HQ DNS out. Save that. One more to go. Let's make a copy. HQ ANI in is going to contain the partition of HQ ANI in. Let's verify that we created all the partitions we thought we did. Let's do a go and a find. Let's see, we've got HQ BR1, BR2, PSTN, internal, HQ ANI in, HQ DNS out. That looks fantastic. Something else I want my phones to have access to would be any media resources that would be needed for conference calling, or transcoding between different codecs, or listening to music on hold, or listening to annunciator messages, and so on. In order to customize how that works, I need to create some media resource groups, and then I can populate some media resource group lists with those media resource groups. For now, I'm just going to say that every site has access to every media resource, and then I can make modifications later if I want to. Let's go to Media Resources and Media Resource Group, which is we abbreviate as MRG oftentimes. If I do a find, you can see that I don't have any by default. I'm going to create one for each site. I'll say that I have a media resource group called HQ, and I'm going to select all of my media resources. Put them down here in the selected media resources. Let's do a save. And I'll copy that and create one called BR1, again containing all the available media resources. I'll create a copy of that. Call this one BR2, containing all those media resources. Now I want to create a media resource group list for each site that will contain that site's media resource group. I'll go under Media Resources, Media Resource Group List. Do we have any by default? No, we do not. Let's add one. Let's add one for HQ. And I'll add the HQ Media Resource Group and save that. Let's make a copy. Create one for BR1 that contains the BR1 Media Resource Group. Save that. Make a copy, or I could just say add new. We'll create one called BR2 that contains the BR2 Media Resource Group. And now we should have a series of media resource group lists, one for each of our three sites that we might set up, HQ, BR1, and BR2. Now that I've got a lot of those parameters set up, I can assign those values to device pools. And I can assign those device pools to phones when I create them at different sites. So for HQ, what we're going to be doing in this video, those HQ phones get to inherit the settings that I'm about to specify in the HQ device pool. So they know what time zone they're in, as an example. They know what media resources they have access to. Let's go under System, Device Pool, and we've got one by default called Default. I'm going to rename that to HQ. And I'm going to say that the DateTime group is HQ, that's the default. The region is HQ. Media Resource Group List, that's HQ. Location, that's HQ. That's all I want to set for now. Let's do a save. I like to do a reset whenever I mess with the device pool. Now, let's add a new device pool. This one's going to be for the BR1 site. We'll call it BR1. And it's going to use that same Communications Manager group, that group of one server. And its DateTime group is BR1, its region is BR1, its MRGL is BR1, its location is BR1. Save that. And create one more device pool. Let's say add new. And this is going to be the BR2 device pool. We'll say BR2. We've only got one Communications Manager group, the DateTime group, BR2, the region, BR2, MRGL, BR2, location, BR2. We'll save that. The next thing I want to do is to create users for my IP phones. So I'll go under User Management, select End User. Let's add a new user. First I'll say HQ Phone 1, that'll be my user ID. I'll give a password of Cisco. I'll give a pin of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Not great values for the real world. This is just so I can easily remember them. We'll say the last name is phone 1, and the first name is HQ. And we'll set the display name to HQ phone 1. Let's do a save. Now I want to add some permissions to this user. The common permissions I usually add, I'll say add to access control group. And there's a couple. We'll do a find here. The two that I always use are standard CCM end users and standard CTI, which is computer telephony integration, standard CTI enabled. I'll say add selected. I'll do another save. Let's add a user for our other phone. Very similarly, I'll call this one HQ phone 2. HQ phone 2, password is Cisco. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is the pin. Last name is phone 2. First name is HQ. Display name is HQ phone 2. Let's save that, and then we'll add some permissions. Assign this user to some groups of standard CCM end users and standard CTI enabled. Add selected, save, and we've created our 2 users. Now we're finally ready to create our 2 phones. And when we add the phones, unless we're doing something like auto registration, we need to know the MAC addresses associated with those phones. And it's kind of a hassle to try to go to the phones and write down the MAC address on a piece of paper and make sure that we type it in just perfectly into this interface. What I like to do instead is go out and use Cisco Discovery Protocol and just copy and paste the MAC addresses of our phones. If I go out to the physical switch, which is connected into the NIC1 interface on my physical VMware server. That's what's connected to our HQ-SW switch that we set up, our virtual switch. I can do a show CDP neighbors command, and we can see both of our IP phones as well as our communications manager server named HQ CUCM pub. That speaks CDP also. Here's the MAC address of HQ phone 1. Here's the MAC address of HQ phone 2. Let's copy the MAC address of HQ phone 1, and let's go add that. We'll say device, phone, and we have to specify the type of phone. We'll say add new, and the type of phone is a Cisco 8845 that we're installing. Say next. I'll paste in that MAC address. That'll make sure I get it correct. The description is HQ phone 1. The device pool is HQ. The phone button template is going to be the standard phone button template for the 8845 phone. And the soft key template, I'll make that standard user. The calling search space, this is an HQ phone, so I'll give it the HQ calling search space. And I'll say that the user associated with this phone is HQ phone 1. And there are some SIP specific things that we have to set here. We have to say that the device security profile is Cisco 8845 standard SIP non-secure profile. The SIP profile is standard SIP profile. Let's scroll down. I just want to make sure that video is enabled for this phone. It should be by default. I'm just going to confirm that. Video capabilities are enabled. Excellent. I'll save this, and once I save it, I'll then be able, and only then will I be able to add a phone number to this phone, a directory number. Notice here I can add a couple of directory numbers. I'll say add a new DN for directory number, and I'll make this directory number 2001. I'll put this in the partition of internal. Remember, any internal directory numbers at HQ, they're going to be in the internal partition. The description is going to be HQ phone 1. Just copy and paste that for the alerting name as well. And for the call forward settings, we don't currently have voicemail set up. I plan on showing you how to set up voicemail in a future video. But for now, I just want to get ready for that. I'll say that if we're in a busy condition or a no answer condition or an unregistered condition, I want to go to voicemail. So I'm going to check those boxes. And the calling search spaces can be a little bit tricky sometimes when you're dealing with this. So I like to say to use the configured calling search space, and I'll set the calling search space of HQ for all of those checked options. Now, we're going to go to voicemail. It says if we don't answer. What constitutes a no answer condition? How many seconds? I'm going to say 10 seconds means no answer. We want our caller ID to be correct. So I'll say my display caller ID is HQ phone 1. That'll also be my ASCII display. For the external phone number mask, this is going to be my fully qualified E.164 number, at least that's the way I like to do it, which is a plus and then the country code and then the number within the country. So I'll say +1 859 222, and then whatever the 4-digit extension is, I want that to appear. So I'll say XXXX. And we were talking about a no answer condition earlier. Well, what constitutes a busy condition? Well, right now, I would have to have 2 calls that were active before I would give a busy signal to anybody calling in. I'm going to set that to 1 instead. I'll save that. Then I can associate the user with this directory number. Just as a good practice, I'll say associate end users. Let's do a find. And I'll associate my HQ phone 1 end user. We'll do an add selected. And I'll do a save. We'll do a go. And let's save this at the phone level. And to make sure it takes effect, let's do a reset. Do a reset and a close. Now, let's add another phone. I'm just going to make a copy of this one because it's so similar. Let's make a copy and we'll add HQ phone 2. Let's go get its MAC address from our CDP output. Let's copy. Here's the MAC address. It's going to be HQ phone 2. Most things are going to be the same here. Just double checking. Oh yeah, the user's different. It's going to be HQ phone 2. I think everything else is the same. Let's save that. And then let's go update the directory number. It's going to have a different directory number, obviously. We'll say add directory number. It's going to be 2002 in this case. The partition is going to be internal. Let's select internal. The description is HQ phone 2. It's going to be the alerting name and the ASCII alerting name as well. Let's set up those same call forward options for busy and for no answer and for unregistered. Let's use configured calling search space. And that configured calling search space is the HQ calling search space. The no answer ring duration is going to be 10 seconds. The display caller ID is HQ phone 2. And the external phone number mask is going to be +1 859 222 and then XXXX. We'll set the busy trigger to 1. We'll save that. And let's associate an end user with this line. And that end user is, you guessed it, HQ phone 2. We'll add selected. Do a save. We'll go back to the phone level. Make sure we save it there, just to be safe. And then we'll do a reset. At this point, we've got the basic configuration in place whenever that phone tries to register. However, in order for that phone to register, it needs an IP address, it needs a subnet mask, it needs a default gateway, it needs to know the IP address of a TFTP server. You see, this server, this Communications Manager server, it's acting as a TFTP server from which that IP phone can download its configuration file so it knows to come here and download its configuration. It's going to learn that TFTP server's information as part of the information it gets via DHCP. Remember earlier we had DHCP turned off because we weren't ready to hand out that information yet? Well, now let's set up that DHCP server. Let's go under System. And by the way, you don't have to use your Communications Manager server as your DHCP server. Sometimes I'll use a router instead. Either one works just fine. But let's use our Communications Manager server. We'll go under System DHCP. First, let's set up the server. And the parameters here get inherited down into all the different subnets or the different scopes in Microsoft terminology. Let's add a new server, and it's going to be us. And even though we don't have it set up right now, later on in a future video, I'm going to set up a DNS server at 10.3.3.5. It's going to be a Microsoft Windows 2012 R2 server. Now I need to specify the IP address of this server, which is acting as the TFTP server from which that phone's going to download its configuration file. So once again, I'll say 10.3.3.1. That's all I need to do at the server level. The rest of the information I can give at the subnet level. Let's go under System, and we'll say DHCP subnet. Let's create a new subnet. And this phone is part of the same subnet as this server. So this is the server that we're going to be using. The subnet address is 10.3.3.0. And we'll jump down here to give the subnet mask of 255.255.255.0. And maybe I want to limit which IP addresses get handed out. Maybe I want to hand out IP addresses in the range of 10.3.3.10 through 10.3.3.20. So I can specify a starting and ending address in that range. 10.3.3.10 will be my beginning IP address, and it will end with 10.3.3.20. I need to specify a default gateway. It's going to be my router, my CSR 1000V router with an IP address of 10.3.3.100. And I think we're good here. Let's save that. Of course, at this point, the DHCP server is not currently running. So I need to go start that service. Remember, we went into Cisco Unified Serviceability to do that. Let's say go. And we'll go back under Tools, Service Activation. And let's enable the DHCP monitor service. We'll say save. Yes, we want to activate it. That service is now activated, and I heard a tone from one of the phones in the background. It suddenly got some network information, and it's going to go through a cycle of registering, and it might need to reboot a couple of times because it's never registered with this particular server before. But in just a few moments, we should have both of our phones registered with our Communications Manager server. Just to speed things along, I'm going to pause the video right now and go reboot those phones, and I'll rejoin you once they have booted back up and registered with our Communications Manager. Well, great news, our phones have registered. This is HQ Phone 1, this is HQ Phone 2. Moment of truth, can I call from one phone to the other phone? Let's go into speakerphone and say 2002. We see the call coming in on HQ Phone 2. Let's answer it. Oh, notice the display. I'm not sure if you can see that on camera, but it actually shows the display name of HQ Phone 1. Now, we not only have a two-way audio call, we've got a two-way video call. Here on HQ Phone 1, the main video is showing the camera from HQ Phone 2, and we also see our local video in a little box down in the lower right-hand corner. Now, I'm going to go back on hook because I'm getting some feedback. Well, we've done it. We've configured Cisco Unified Communications Manager and registered a couple of IP phones. Now, in an upcoming video, I'm going to show you how to add a software-based phone into this environment. Specifically, it's Cisco Jabber. Now, in order to do that, we're going to have to configure a Cisco IM and Present server, and we're also going to have to configure a DNS server. So we'll be installing a Microsoft Windows 2012 R2 as part of that. Now, if you want to be notified when that video comes out, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you've enjoyed this video, please give me a like down below. It really means a lot to me, and I look forward to spending time with you in our next video.